welcome to Wellness Spring. Today, I'm very honored and blessed to have a lovely man, Daniel Gefen, who is the founder of Gefen Media. And he's also the #1 bestseller of a book called The Self Help Addict. And more recently, he was named one of the top 25 influential influencers by Influencive. That's a real tongue twister for me. He's also appeared in over 100 top-rated podcast shows, and the list goes on. And he's very recently Podbooker or Podbooker. So I know Daniel will tell us more about that. And I'm so honored, being a podcaster new to the business, to be interviewing you today. So welcome, Daniel.
Well, the honor is all mine, Beverly. Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Would you please tell the audience about your background and what led you to be this incredible person you are today?
Well, I mean, I hope I was an incredible person back then as well. I guess didn't believe in myself enough to know that. Yeah, my backstory is when I was young in school, I guess I was the class clown. I would jump up on tables and try to get people's attention. And you know, at first I was this happy clown because I was entertaining people. It was fun. I was getting in a lot of trouble with the teachers, of course. But as I grew a bit older and started to get a little bit more self-aware, I noticed that I didn't really have any friends, and people were laughing at me instead of with me. So the clown became sort of a sad clown on the inside. But on the outside, of course, I wore the brave face and the happy clown face, you know, the whole time. So there were these sort of two worlds in a way. There was the outside world that people saw me as this happy-go-lucky clown, and then the inside dark world where I was kind of this just very depressed clown. And as I grew older, I worked a lot on sort of personal development. I got very, very involved in personal development. I would devour any book on human nature and self-improvement, and then sort of became, I guess, what you would call a self-help addict, I call it, and became addicted to self-help, which is a real thing. If people don't realize, there's an absolute insane amount of information out there today, and people consume information sometimes way too much, so that we get overloaded and heavy, and it causes a lot of indecision, which leads to inaction, and then we end up just constantly, you know, trying to prepare and trying to be ready, but we're never truly ready for life anyway. You're never truly ready to hit the record button. And in this case, Beverly, just before we started, you did forget to hit the record button, which is great. Which is great. Yeah, I know you weren't. Well, I'm going to say it because I think it's important for people to realize that we all make mistakes. I've actually recorded a podcast. Well, no, I will say this. I've interviewed someone on a podcast, and then at the end, and it was an amazing interview. It was so good. And only at the end, I realized I forgot to hit the record button. And by the way, this is after doing about, at that point, over 100 episodes, right? So it wasn't like I was new. And I couldn't believe I made such a simple error, but it just goes to show that we're all human, and we make mistakes, and it happens. But do you know what's worse than hitting the record button is never hitting the record button? That's worse. And unfortunately, there's so many people who will never hit the record button. They'll never write a book. They'll never start their own business. They'll never do any of the things that they want to achieve because they're too scared, because they're too busy sort of preparing. And I believe that a lot of times fear is disguised as preparation. So that's kind of the backstory, if you will. I got into podcasting 4 years ago, and that's an interesting story which we can go into if you want as well.
Oh, absolutely. But before you go into it, what did you do? You know, obviously you were reading all these books and all the self-help, which I can relate to, because when I first lived in Australia, I was a Reiki master and teacher and a sports massage therapist. And to keep our credit units, because clients could get money back from us from their private health, we had to do 100 continuing credit units every year. So it's very easy to become a self-help addict, because I was doing course after course just to get my units, but then you get addicted. And it's like you say, you go into overwhelm. You've got all this information, but you're not putting it into practice. So
Yeah.
while you were reading all these books, what were you doing
Reading more
work-wise?
books. Reading.
Oh, books, of course. What was
saying.
bringing the money in? You know, what
That's
did you go to university?
No,
Did
I
you?
dropped out. Yeah, I dropped out of high school and then just ended up working for various different jobs, never really managing to to stay hired because I, didn't fit the mold, quite simply. Didn't like to be told when to take lunch. I want to eat lunch when I'm hungry, not at 1 p.m., right? Or whatever
Yeah.
it was. And so I realized that I needed to design my lifestyle, right? I needed to design my own lives, because the way that most people live life is conformed to the way that sort of the majority of people have decided. You go to school and you have to sit and listen to boring lectures about subjects you don't want to listen to, and you have to, get a job and sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5 on a Monday to Friday and take a 2-week or 3-week vacation a year. Like, that just didn't fit the lifestyle that I wanted. And so I realized that the only way out of that prison, if you will, and for some people, by the way, it isn't a prison. I'm not here to say that everybody should be an entrepreneur. I don't believe that. To some people, that's the life they want. I like cheesecake. Some people hate cheesecake, right? So for me, it was a prison, and the only way out of it was to be an entrepreneur and to start my own business. So that's essentially how I started my first business. My wife was very supportive, and she saw how much I struggled and how much I really hated working for other people. And she's actually the one that pushed me to leave the work, working for other companies and go and pursue my own thing. And now it's been about just over 10 years since I started my first company, and it's been a very enjoyable ride.
Fantastic. And can you tell us one thing to help people starting their own business? Because I know you're super successful. What tip would that be?
Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, success is very relative as well. A lot of people talk about success, but success is really defined the way you want to define it, not the way other people define it. What one person considers success, another person may consider failure. And I'll give you a quick example. For me, somebody who makes a lot of money but is divorced, and doesn't have a relationship with their children and is miserable inside, that's not success to me at all, right? So everybody has their own definition of success. For me, I feel like the key to being successful in your own right, in what you believe success is for you, is to every day work towards what you want to achieve and try to stay really focused on that and not get distracted by, there's so many distractions. There could be people in your life that will, that may not be good for you, that may, just rob you of your time and suck you out of your energy. People who are very draining to be around. Just try to stay in your own lane, try to stay focused. There are things that happen that are out of our control, like this pandemic, for example, or the government, or, whatever it is that that happens in life. Life throws us all sorts of curveballs. And the goal, I feel, is no matter what happens, is don't forget what you're doing. Don't forget why you're doing it, and just keep going forward. And as long as you're staying consistent, you know, let's say you're writing a book, and the goal obviously is to publish the book. Well, as long as you're spending some time every day committed to writing the book, it doesn't matter how long, right? It could be that one day you're going to be switched on and you're going to get into a really creative zone, and you'll write for 3 hours straight, right? Sometimes that happens. Other days you're just not in it. You're just but as long as you sit down and you just spend 5 minutes writing something, because then what you're doing is you're training your muscle. You're training that mental muscle inside that I'm committed. I'm committed. And commitment is a big word, especially today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very, very big word. And most, unfortunately, the reason why most people don't achieve what they want to, it's because they're not committed to it. Because if they were, I guarantee you, I don't care who you are, what your situation is, if you're committed to something, you will achieve it. You will get there. You've got to stay committed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I said to you the other night, now I need to have a buddy to make me focus and committed to writing my book so that I can promote it on your podcast.
There
your
you go.
Podbooker. Yes.
Podbooker, yeah, podbooker.com. Yeah.
So before we talk about that, can you tell us how you got into podcasting? And because I did listen to your talk about your first one on the Daniel Gefen show, and you talked about the headphones.
Yeah.
Hit mine tonight because I'm in a hotel and I haven't got my gear, but now I see you with yours. I'm going to plug mine in. I think you were walking and you were talking away and saying, you know, I really don't know who's going to listen to me, and, you know, I've got the courage and so forth. But how did you take that first step to start out?
So, yeah, actually, the Daniel Gefen Show was my second podcast. Can I Pick Your Brain was the first one that I started. So the story is about 4 years ago, I was playing tennis, and I get a phone call from someone who said to me, Daniel, I heard you have an interesting story. I'd love to have you on my podcast. And my response to him was, what the heck is a podcast? I had no idea what a podcast was at that time. Not only did I not know what a podcast was, I didn't have any social media following, any online presence, you know, totally nothing. And I decided, wow, this is a great opportunity. You know, I'd love to be on this podcast. So next thing I know, I'm a guest and I'm speaking on the microphone, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with just sharing my stories and talking. And the time went by really quickly. I had a lot of fun. And at the end, the host said, you know, thanks so much for coming on the show, Daniel. And I said, well, thank you so much for having me. And then I had this one question. How many people are listening to this? Right? Because I'm sitting there staring at a blank wall. I don't know who I'm talking to. Maybe there's 10 people, maybe there's 20 people. That's what I was thinking. So when there are over 1,000 people listening to this podcast, I almost fell off my chair. I said, did you say 1,000 people? He said, yeah. And I said, where are all these people? And he said, well, they're all over the world. And he starts listing all these countries. And I thought, oh my goodness me, this is huge. I mean, if I'm this nobody, right, totally invisible online, zero following, never spoken in public before, and here I am in front of over 1,000 people all over the world in my bedroom, this is something I really want to get into. And so I started my first podcast, Can I Pick Your Brain, 2 weeks after that. And the goal for the podcast was really just to have a bit of fun and also see if I can interview some of the biggest, you know, entrepreneurs and business leaders and, you know, thought leaders of this generation. Well, the two problems was, one, I didn't know anyone. So I didn't know who I could interview. How am I going to get guests for my show, right? And the second problem was, how do I get people to listen to the podcast? Because I had no audience. And that was my biggest issue. So that's when I had this sort of light bulb moment where I said, well, that guy had 1,000 people listening. So if I just get on other podcasts as a guest, hopefully I'll build my audience that way and they'll come and listen to my podcast, right? Well, that's exactly what I did. And I just started getting booked on any podcast I can get on. You know, anyone that would take me as a guest, I would just get on that show and start talking and sharing my story and sharing my podcast. Well, in a very short period of time, less than 2 years, my podcast became a top-ranked show on iTunes. We got to over 300,000 downloads with that podcast. Ended up interviewing 4 billionaires, the smartest man alive, the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI, the US memory champion, New York Times bestselling authors, and a whole host of incredible guests. And then I wrote my own book, The Self Help Addict, which then became an international bestseller, all just by getting booked on podcasts as a guest. And so then I got bombarded with emails from PR agencies and book publicists trying to get on my podcast or trying to get their clients on my podcast as guests. And I just kept sending them to spam because, number one, they didn't have any relationship with me. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who I was. And number two, themselves at all, right? They didn't, they get their clients just sounded really boring. They sounded like everybody else. It was just the same old, same old. And after a couple of months of getting dozens of these a day, I woke up one morning and I had another light bulb moment, which was, well, clearly there's a lot of people wanting to get on podcasts, but nobody seems to know how to do it right. Well, I've got my own top-rated show. I'm friends with all these top-rated hosts, so I've got the relationships already that I've built. I've been on over, like you said, around 100 podcasts at that point, right? So I know how to be a guest on shows, and I've interviewed over 150 high-profile guests, so I know what great guests sound like. Why don't I start a podcast booking agency? And that's how Gefen Media Group was born. And then after a number of years, I would say 3 years of doing Gefen Media Group, which we're still doing today, I suddenly had this realization that I was only catering to a small market. You only have a small amount of people that can afford to spend thousands of dollars on a booking agency to get them on the top shows. But there are probably, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, that want to get booked as guests on shows, but they can't afford to spend that kind of money. On the flip side, I'm only working with the top 250 podcasts. Those are the ones that I'm getting my clients on. But there is over 1.5 million podcasts out there. So there are at least, I would say, hundreds of thousands, if not a million podcast hosts that are looking for guests to be on their show. But how are they getting guests? They don't have a way to get them because they're too small. And that's when I had the idea for podbooker.com, which essentially guests can go on there, set up a profile, and then find podcasts and reach out to them and get booked on their podcasts. And then you've got hosts who could set up a podcast profile and then reach out and invite guests to be on their show.
Wow, that's incredible. And I know I'm going to sign up for sure, which I did earlier. Now I just have to have my profile. And as I said to you a while back, I'm a big fan of yours and just love listening to your shows. Who's the funniest person or the most interesting person you've ever interviewed? Or have you got any funny stories to share?
Well, the funniest is... There's a lot of funny stories. JP Sears was on my show, and he's the funniest guy that I probably know, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. He's a comedian / self-help coach. He'll probably hate me for saying that because there's a lot of bad self-help gurus out there, giving the industry a bad name. But that JP Sears is I believe one of the real deals who, in a very entertaining way, really gets down to the that I think society's facing. So he was very funny. Memorable guests would be one of the billionaires that I had. His name was Jeff Hoffman. The reason why I almost said David was because I had a billionaire on my show who kept calling me David, even though my name's Daniel. And I kept correcting him. I think I corrected him about 8 times. I said, it's Daniel. And he kept saying, yes, David. So I'm like, it's Daniel. But he, for some reason, just kept calling me David. Anyway, but Jeff Hoffman, he was incredible. Probably one of my favorite guests. And one of the most memorable things that he said was, I said to him, Jeff, what's the difference between a billionaire and anyone else? I mean, there's only 2,000 billionaires in the entire planet. So how did you do it? And he said, well, Dan, I have this sign up in my office that says, ideas are welcome here, but execution is worshipped.
Wow.
It really stuck with me because it's all about the execution. That's what it really comes down to. You can want to write a book. You can want to start a business. You can want to start a podcast. You can want to, go out and get booked on podcasts. But if you don't actually go and do it, then it's just not going to happen. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's a very powerful statement. I'm going to write that out and stick it on my desk and look at it every day. And so if there was one thing that you've learned that you know today that you could have done a long time ago, what would that be?
Not care about what other people think as much. That's for sure. That gets in the way a lot. So I still struggle with it because I'm a human being. And I think that I'm not sure. I mean, I'll choose my words carefully. I don't like saying the word impossible because I really believe everything's possible. But I will say that it's very rare to find an individual who doesn't care at all about what anyone thinks about them, because that's, that might be a psychopath. That maybe a psychopath might be on that. So there's a human need to care about what people think, but there's a difference, and here's the key. There's a distinction between caring about the person and caring about what they think of you. And if you could separate the two, your life will be a lot more enjoyable. So, growing up, I cared immensely about what people thought of me. And because of that, I had to wear different disguises and kind of almost, I guess, lost it. Daniel. Because if Daniel is whoever everyone wants them to be at this given time, at any given time, then Daniel doesn't really have any identity. The identity that you have is the identity that if it's based on what everyone else, if it's based on what you think everyone else wants you to be, well, then you don't have an identity. You just have a disguise for everybody. You're a chameleon. And I think that's really key. Because when you stop caring about what everyone thinks about you, then you're able to go and actually pursue the things that you really want to pursue for yourself. And the truth is, it doesn't really matter what people think of you, because whatever they think of you is based on their own interpretations of the world. It's based on their own background, their experience, their beliefs, their thinking, their experience, their own self-doubts. It's projections. That's all it is. Imagine everyone in the world holding up a mirror. That's pretty much all it is. Yeah. And so when you look at the mirror, you see what you think they see, but it's not true. It's not reality. It's false.
Yeah.
The reality is that everybody just wants to be appreciated and loved. That's all it is. Everyone, every single human being. And so when you walk into a room, if you're thinking about, well, I'm worried about what they're thinking about me and how I look and how I speak, they're not. The reality is that they're thinking about what they look like and how they sound. So we're all doing the same thing. Now, if you could switch that from an internal to an external, so if you could flip it around and say, okay, in that case, what I'm going to do, knowing that, is I'm going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on giving them the attention and the love that they want and that they need. And what happens is a very special thing. You become the most attractive person in the room.
I totally agree. And because I believe exactly what you said, and also looking for validation, and they want to be heard. So if you're there 100% for them, they've never experienced that. So it's like giving them a big dose of love. So
yeah,
that's wonderful words of advice. And who or what has inspired you most in life?
My grandfather, without hesitation. My father's father. As you know, I've interviewed a lot of very high-profile individuals, and you know, I've had my fair share of watching, you know, all the biggest influences that you've heard of. But my grandfather was in 18 concentration camps at the age of 13 years old.
Wow!
And he was there for 5 years. He was shot and buried alive at one point. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, and he pretended to be dead, and escaped after it got dark and they left. But then got found and was, you know, brought back, and then subsequently hung twice. The first time the sirens went off and he managed to escape, and then they caught him again and tried to hang him, and again the sirens went off, and that time it was the real liberation. He was liberated, but he watched his entire family get murdered in front of his eyes. When he left, he had nothing, zero, no friends, no family, no money, no resources, didn't even know the language, couldn't even speak the language that he was. So literally had nothing, and he had to rebuild himself from scratch. And he did. He built a beautiful family, and thanks to him, I'm alive today. I mean, it wouldn't be, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be alive. And what's really special about him is that when he was alive, he dedicated his entire life to serving people and helping people. And he would always have a smile on his face. I never saw him without a smile on his face. And this is someone who saw hell.
Wow.
So yeah, that's
I've
my
got
inspiration.
goosebumps, but I listened to a podcast last Saturday, and the story sounds identical to a man called Eddie Jaku, who experienced twice he escaped death because he should have gone in the gas chambers, and he was in Auschwitz, and he got shot. He managed to escape, went to a house, asked if they could give him a shirt, and instead the guy came out with a gun and shot him in the leg, and he ended up going back into Auschwitz because he needed treatment. And the list went on, and now he just turned 100 this year, and for the last 20 odd years, for over 20 years, he's been in Sydney Jewish Museum, and every week he gives a talk to different people and to school children and things.
Amazing.
It sounded like that. Oh my God. Anyway, that's a wonderful, wonderful story about your grandfather, and he's got your love, and you've got his love and his blood and his genes, and that's why you're so special today. And
well, speaking about the gas chambers, so there was one story that he also shared one time that I remember, and that was he was also going into the gas chambers. And one of the Nazis' horses made on the Nazi's boot, and this Nazi turned around to the person who was next to him, which was my grandfather standing in line waiting to go in, and he said, you know, "Get out here, you dirty Jew, and clean this up." And so essentially, my grandfather bent down, cleaned up the boot, and then the Nazi told him he can go. And so cleaning up crap saved his life in a sense. And so it's kind of the message that I take from that is that when we're in the crap, when we're actually, when we feel like we're just cleaning crap up, sometimes that actually could be the very thing that saves our life. Like sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come after the biggest breakdowns.
Oh, I got goosebumps again. That definitely resonates, and I totally agree. Wow, what a story, You're lucky to be alive, It could have turned instantly with your grandfather being killed.
Yeah, I mean, we're all lucky to be alive, right? We're all, the statistics of being alive is very small if you think about it, right?
Yeah, especially now today, I don't know how it's affected your business with the COVID and the fear of COVID. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, I thought it was totally inhumane with all those mass deaths and mass funerals in New York and Italy, because so many people had died and there wasn't enough burial grounds for them.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, COVID, the business, because we're doing podcast booking, getting people on podcasts. So now's actually a time when everyone's trying to get on podcasts because there's no speaking engagements, there's no events to go to or networking, and so the only way to really reach a mass audience is to get those on podcasts. So it's actually been very good for us in that respect. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm not thankful for COVID. I'm thankful for my business has been okay.
It's wonderful. I think for a lot of people, like you said, when sometimes you have to break down to break through, good things happen. There's a lot of people who have turned their businesses around completely. And
yes.
So
I mean, I launched Podbooker.com in COVID, right?
Yeah.
So you just got to you got to find opportunities. There's opportunities everywhere. If the whole world goes dark and you figured out a way to switch on a light, well then that's what you need to be doing. Just when times go dark, find ways to help people to light things up, and you'll be just fine.
Absolutely. You're such an inspiration. And I just want to ask you, if there was one thing you could do to change the world and make it a better place to live in, what would that be?
Help people to see the beauty in themselves. That's it.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. To connect with the love inside them and see the beauty. This is what the world needs right now. So.
Yeah.
And I know you're pressed for time, and I'm really blessed and honored to be with the #1 podcaster. And how can people get hold of you?
I mean, the best thing is right now it's actually free to join podbooker.com, so you can go and sign up as a guest or as a host or both. And then I've got a podcast that I just launched called Grow Your Show. So if they're just launched a podcast, or they're, thinking of launching a podcast, or even if they have a podcast, but they just want to know how to grow it. So the show is me interviewing other podcasts who have successfully grown their podcast and also monetized it, made money from it. So that's Grow Your Show. They can just subscribe there.
Fantastic. And I'll put it in the blurb as well. So
thank you. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Pleasure.